Good afternoon, I'm Chicken Johnny, and you're down in the grow room with Chicken Johnny. Now, it's a little bit too early for me to start planting seeds, but if I waited to make this video until I could be planting seeds in my area, most of you would have already planted seeds, and so it wouldn't be as helpful a video. In this episode today, we're going to talk about what's some of the hardware that you need, some of the things that you've got to have in order to plant seedlings. It includes the raw materials that you're going to use. Now, we're going to talk a little bit in this episode about whether you should buy this Miracle-Gro planting mix. Now, this is actually Miracle-Gro potting mix, but I don't have any seed starting mix. But whether you should pay the money for a seed starting mix or whether you can use peat moss and perlite. The hardware that I use is fairly simple. There are two different pieces that I use. Now, I've got some variety, and I'll show you a few oddball things that I have, and I'll tell you why I have them. But the first thing that I use, these are 1020 trays, and they get the name 1020 tray because they're 10 inches across and 20 inches long. It's important that you have these 1020 trays, and they come in two different styles. They come with holes in the bottom and without holes in the bottom. I only purchase trays without holes in the bottom, and the reason is after about 2 or 3 seasons they all have holes in the bottom. In the corners of these trays you end up getting small holes. Well, last year one of the things that happened to me was I had a few of these bottom trays that leaked slightly. So I'd water the plant, and I expected the tray to catch that water so that it could rehumidify and wick back up into the plant, and instead it poured out the bottom. And because the plant trays themselves, they've got holes in them, so that these sit here, the water drains out of these cells until it hits the moisture that the plant or that the ground is designed to hold, and we'll show you that in a minute. But then some of that water will stay down here, and you'll have a zone where the water sits here where it stays wet. Now, I don't generally use these individual trays. This is what we'll use if we're growing to sell the plants at market. And so far, I have not done that. There's a good market for it, but I've not done that. Here's an example. I didn't realize I had it sitting here. So I grabbed a couple of other trays to show as an example. Here's a 1020 tray that's got holes in the bottom, came from the factory like that. As I said, I don't buy them like this. I mean, obviously, at one time or another, I got a hold of that. You can even get them that are completely open, mesh like this. And this is probably, once I get my greenhouse up and going, I will probably start buying trays like this, because one of the objectives that I have is to put flood tables in my greenhouse. Now, this also has, like this one, it has these sections, these dividers sectioned off, and that's so that you can take trays like this and set inside them, and well, I'll just take a look. And you can set these across into the tray like that. And it's nice when you go to transport them, because these ridges give support to the tray. Incidentally, when you purchase 1020 trays, these trays are inexpensive. They're about $1 a piece if you buy them in any kind of quantity. I think you can get them for about $90 for 100 of them. And so I don't generally have more than 75 trays going on at any one time, but I do have some trays that get used twice within a season. But when you buy these trays, if you're only going to buy a few of them, buy a higher quality tray. Now, I don't particularly care for what Haas Tools has because it doesn't match what I have, but if you wanted to start with that, that'd probably be okay. I don't particularly care for the cell sizes, but that depends on sort of what plants you're planting and how long they're going to be in there. I generally use, this is called a 50 cell plug tray. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across this way, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 times 5, 50. So we call it a 50 cell. These trays have holes in the bottom, and those holes serve two purposes. One, you can plant in here and the water will drain through the bottom of this into your 50 tray, and so your plants will be able to drain down, but there'll be water standing in that tray that they can suck back up. Also, by the time the season's over, roots will have pushed through these little holes, and they'll be sucking water right out of the bottom of that tray. The other thing that's nice about these is you can take, I usually use a little bolt out in the field, a little 3/8 bolt, but you can take a pencil like this, shove it through the hole. I don't know if you can see what I'm doing there. You shove it right through the hole, and that will push the seedling out. So we'll take a whole bunch of these trays and we'll punch all the holes out. Now, I'm thinking of spending some money to buy a dibble board, and what a dibble board is, it's got holes lined up exactly where all of those holes are. So when you plant your seeds, after you get all your dirt, you can use the dibble board to press down, and it'll create all 50 of those dibbles all at the same time. But then when you're out in the field getting ready to transplant, you can line this up on the dibble board, press it down, and all of your seedlings will come up. Now, it may not work quite that easily, but that's the idea behind it. Now, these trays are also rather flimsy. I don't think I would invest in thicker trays. There are places you can get thicker trays and thicker plug trays. I don't think I'd do that. These I pay about $1 a piece for. Again, I buy them. I generally buy these from the Greenhouse Mega Store. There's a lot of different places you can buy them from, but I think I found my best value at the Greenhouse Mega Store. So there are other sizes of trays. You can get 48. These here, these are 48 plugs per 1020 tray, but you're going to get different sizes that fit into the 1020 tray. The standard sizes that you and I might use would be the 50, the 72, and I think it's 120. Those would be standard size trays, but you could conceivably do a 240 plug tray, and that might be a decent tray if you're starting onions ahead of time. They even make 480 trays. They make some trays that have some really small plug holes in them, and I don't really have any particular use for those. I like to be somewhat standardized, and the 50 tray works well for me. The reason that I use a 50 as opposed to, say, a 48 is my automatic transplanter works really well with a plant that's been grown in a 50 cell. If I use a plant that was grown in the 48 cell, it's just slightly bigger, and it will hang up as the planter is dropping the plants through. So that's all I've got for trays, and as I think of some other things, I might bring them up. But let's move into seed starter mix. There are actually a lot of different mixes that you can buy at the store, pre-mixes, and I'm not going to go over all of them, but the most popular would be the Miracle-Gro. Now this happens to be Miracle-Gro potting mix and not seed starter mix. I have not found the Miracle-Gro seed starter mix, so I used the Miracle-Gro potting soil on a couple of things. Now the first thing that I notice on this bag of potting mix is that it says that it grows plants twice as big, and I'm sure that's true. I'm sure that there's some way to grow plants half the size of the Miracle-Gro, but not twice as big as peat moss and vermiculite, or peat moss and a little compost. So what is it about this potting mix? Well, it's primarily peat moss, and that's true for all seed starting mixes, all what we call soilless mixes. So when you buy a soilless mix, no matter who you buy it from and no matter what you're buying, it's going to be a mixture of these three items. You've got peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite. Now you also might have some compost, but that would make it a potting mix, not a seed starting mix. So like I just showed you there, that's a potting mix. And it says that there is some nitrogen, there is some potassium, and there is some phosphorus, but it's less than 1%. It says on the bag that there's 21%, 0.21% nitrogen, 0.11% phosphorus, and it's hard to read it. Is that? And 0.16% potassium. When I have 0.14% nitrogen, I kind of feel like I'm out of nitrogen. However, that's mixed in the bag, so it is some nitrogen, it is some potassium, and it is some phosphorus. With what we're mixing up, there's really not, I don't think there's any actual nutrients in the peat moss. Now there's got to be some because it's a natural item and it was alive at one point. But you're certainly not feeding the plants with peat moss. And perlite, as far as I know, has absolutely no nutritional value to it, and vermiculite, zero nutritional value. So why would we make up our own mix if that one actually is a little bit better? Well, the question is it really a little bit better? And we could certainly make this into a potting mix that was much more nutritious than that store-bought potting mix. And I think that that's pretty much all of the store-bought potting mixes are going to be the same, whether they're Miracle-Gro or Bonnie or whatever company is making it up. They're going to be pretty similar. The quality of some of the ingredients might be different in one or the other, but they're going to be pretty similar. So what are these ingredients? Well, vermiculite, right there. Vermiculite is a mined material, and it looks to me, it looks like corn cob. I'm going to turn this in here. To me, it looks like broken up corn cobs. Another one that we have here is perlite. And perlite is actually exploded volcanic rock. It's very light, it's very fluffy, dusty, but it's rock, it's solid. You get these larger pieces, it's kind of hard to break them up. I mean, you can. It looks like styrofoam inside your planting mix. It's not styrofoam, it's perlite. And then the main ingredient we're going to put in is peat moss. And all of these that I've just mentioned, they're all organic, and they're all mined, each one of them. So none of them are per se renewables. And I certainly wouldn't advocate for spreading peat moss out over my field, and people do that. I wouldn't advocate for that. I probably couldn't afford it. An important step in this process, and you can surely leave this step out, but an important step is to sift the peat moss, and I'll show you why in a second. Now, I'm using a 1/2-inch screen wire, and a 1/4 inch would work as well. It'd probably be better. But I just lightly sifted 1/4 of this container, and I got a lot of really big pieces. So I decided I wanted to sift this down a little bit further. So I made myself a 1/4 inch sifter right over here. And so I'm going to sift this down even a little bit further. It doesn't take too long. If I were wanting to do a bunch of this, I'd make myself a much bigger sifter. I've got one outside, but I can't use it in here, and it's 29 degrees outside, so I've decided to go this route. Okay, I'm going to have to build a bigger sifter, but the concept is correct. And so now I've got this very fine sifted soil, and I'm going to add to this one part perlite. Add 1 container of perlite. Now what the perlite is going to do is it's going to help with the drainage of the soil. We want the soil to drain. Peat moss is going to hold soil or hold moisture pretty well. We want it to drain, but the perlite becomes an aggregate that really breaks the soil up and allows the water to drain out. A lot of people think that the finer the perlite, the better. That, in my opinion, is absolutely incorrect. The reason you want the perlite is to encourage the drainage of the plant. Of course, if you had really large pieces of perlite, that would be bad. This is a pretty big piece of perlite here. And maybe I wouldn't want a whole bin that big, because it's a rock. It's a piece of volcanic glass that has been put in an oven, heated up to, I don't know, 1300 degrees, something like that, until it explodes. And when it explodes, it's like popcorn. It grabs a bunch of air, it becomes very light. Perlite is it's a mined resource, but as long as there's volcanoes, I suppose there's no end to the perlite, so it's not something we're going to run out of. And it helps with drainage. Now, it will help hold moisture a little bit, but it helps a lot with drainage. And if you're going to do soil blocks, and if you don't know what they are, don't worry about it. If you're going to do soil blocks, you probably don't want to use this material. That's a pretty big piece of perlite. I don't want them that big, so I crushed that one up. But you don't want real fine perlite either, because then what's it going to do? You might as well add sand to the soil. And that's my biggest complaint about commercial seed starter mix. They put really small bits of perlite in there, and I just feel as though it's too much. Now I've got one more thing to add to the mix. This is vermiculite, and I'm just going to put a half a container of vermiculite in here. Vermiculite will help hold moisture, so if you're not watering frequently enough, I suppose that might help some, although if you're not watering frequently enough, in the words of Ashley, the Canadian farmer, or the Canadian gardener, water your darn plants. So I'm going to actually, I don't know that I like the consistency of this too much. I'm going to put some more peat into it, I think. Maybe if I can get this mixed up a little bit more. Oh, actually, there's more peat there. Actually, maybe it's just fine. All right. So it's 1 part, or 2 parts peat moss, 1 part perlite, and a half a part vermiculite. You could put a whole part of vermiculite in there. I just not a huge fan of the cost of vermiculite. So even at that entire bag of vermiculite costs less than that little bag of seed starter mix. So from, the Miracle-Gro. All right, so now what we have to do is water this. So I'm taking about 3/4 of a gallon of water, and I'm going to pour that in all around in the vermiculite. I still have maybe 1/4 left in there, but I want to mix this in, and it's amazing. That water essentially disappeared. The ground is damp, but it's certainly not wet. Add a little bit more water to it. Now, why do I add water at this stage? Why not just put it into the trays and then water the trays? Well, first of all, this is faster. It'll soak up. I can put a lot more water in it and soak it up a lot faster. But the main reason that I do it is because your moss, your peat moss, is going to be somewhat hydrophobic as you pour the water on it if you're in your plant cells, and it's going to lift some of that up. And if you try to wick it all from the bottom, it'll work better if it's been pre-moistened. So this is probably a little bit more than I got in that 8-quart bag of Miracle-Gro, and to me it's got a better consistency. So let me show you real quick how I fill a tray. You take your tray, put it right in the bin there. I get it leveled off, and then I'm going to take another tray, another 50 tray. I'm going to set that right on top, and I'm going to push this material down, compressing it, and I'm actually putting quite a little bit of pressure on it. It compacts it down about 1/3 of the way into the cell. is about right. Now the wetter this material is, the less it's going to compact down into the cell. But you're going to want about a third. Now I'm going to take another load of the planting mix. I'm going to level that off. And you can see I'm not real clean about this, not real worried about cleanliness, because this is the area that I do this work in. Now, let me show you one last secret. I'm going to move this. This is just a little trick that I came up with. I set this tray on top of the other tray. I take my pencil and I just shove it into the hole about 3/4 of an inch. And if you can look down and see that, I've got those trays now are pretty well ready. I can just drop a seed in there when I'm ready to. I'll probably do that after we shut the video down. I'll drop a seed in there and then I'll take some material and just wipe it across the top, making sure that I press down slightly so that the seed gets some good contact with the soil. So we used 2 parts peat moss, 1 part perlite, and a 1/2 part of vermiculite. The peat moss is the actual growing media, the actual soilless media. And I called it dirt, I called it soil, I called it all kinds of things. But it's really a soilless growing media. And you could literally grow seeds, sprout seeds, in wool. In fact, they do it. A lot of your hydroponic guys will use just little pods that they start their seeds in, and different materials, but you don't need soil. You do need something for that seed to sit in and root out into. The perlite is there to add drainage to the soil, and the vermiculite is there for some future purposes. Now, I'm not really sure it's necessary, but I put it in there because the cation exchange rate on vermiculite is crazy. So it will hold nutrients and it will release the nutrients back to the plant. The capacity for vermiculite to hold those nutrients and the capacity to act like a nutrient battery is pretty incredible. And when I pot those plants up, I want the vermiculite right in near the roots, because when I plant them up after they get their first set of true leaves, I'll either plant them up into a larger pot or I might plant them out into the field. I want that vermiculite right around those roots, so I want it in the initial seed starting mix. So that's about it for today's video. I had planned to talk a lot more about the seeds themselves, but maybe that's fodder for another video. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, hit that like button, the thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't. And please, by all means, leave a comment down in the comment sections. Let me know if you make your own seed starting mix, or if you use a seed starting mix, one of the commercial brands, which one you like. Leave that information in the comments, both for my benefit and for the benefit of the rest of the people who will be watching this video. So until next time, Emitzer Shem, I'll see you again. I'm Chicken Johnny. Eat your vegetables.